All right, so another level, and this is kind of similar to using the management console, but this is actually using a service in AWS that can do the provisioning for you. So there are also other ways that you can manage your AWS environment using managed tools to help simplify the provisioning process. So if you don't want to do every single step right, if you want to kind of simplify your workflow, you can definitely go with an AWS service like Beanstalk or CloudFormation. So Beanstalk's going to be a platform as a service, so that's going to eliminate the management um, and configuration of your actual environment, of your infrastructure. So all you have to worry about is building your app and then just deploying it. Or you could go with infrastructure as a service. That's going to be AWS CloudFormation. So although it's infrastructure as a service, it's still going to automate a lot of the infrastructure for you. So you can kind of configure it and configure it once and then just have it run and do its thing. And then, of course, you can manage and make changes along the way. So you still have that high level of fine-tuned control over your environment. So let's talk Beanstalk. So Beanstalk's a fully managed service that automates the provisioning of AWS resources like EC2, load balancers, and scaling. So you don't have to worry about controlling and fine-tuning every single part of the infrastructure. All you have to do is provide the code, some really basic configurations, and then AWS will handle the rest. It's going to do the compute capacity. So do you have a lot of customers coming in, more traffic? It'll adjust the capacity for you and scaling. Load balancing, so making sure all your instances are doing the same amount of work. And even health monitoring, making sure that things are running smoothly. So you won't have to do that yourself. So Beanstalk, for example, if you're building a website, you're a solo developer, you want to deploy that website, you could definitely do it through Elastic Beanstalk because you don't have to be an expert on all the compute part of it, the IT infrastructure. You just have to be an engineering expert on building your app and deploying it. Now, if you want a little bit more control, we're moving on to infrastructure as a service. An example of a service in AWS that does that for you is AWS CloudFormation. It's an infrastructure as code tool that automates and standardizes AWS resource deployments. So it's not going to be purely, clicking buttons through the console. You're actually going to have to use special code. So it uses what are called configuration files. And those configuration files are basically going to tell AWS, hey, this is what I want you to do for my infrastructure. So you're writing lines of code instead of using the console to individually provision resources. Provisions for your resources, your resources in a safe, repeatable manner, enabling you to quickly build infrastructure and apps without having to perform manual actions. So while you still have to set up those files, that code, once you set up the code, it's really easy for AWS to read through those files and then follow all the instructions you gave it. Of course, you have to be somewhat of an expert, in those configuration files. Not an expert, but at least know what you're doing before you actually start handing them over to AWS so that it can manage your infrastructure. So it'll determine the right operations to perform when managing your stack and rolls back changes automatically if detects errors. So maybe you changed the configuration file, you updated it, it didn't work. It'll just go back to the previous version and say, hey, you got to make changes to this new one before we actually